Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time. Not to the grand battles or the celebrated empires you've heard about, but to the forgotten corners of daily life. We're going to wander through the dusty streets and bustling marketplaces of ancient civilizations. Not as tourists, but as citizens. You'll feel the hot sun on your back as you navigate a world where a misplaced word or a poorly built wall could land you in deep trouble. You might not survive the experience in one piece, but hey, at least you'll be in good company. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a builder, and the city of Babylon hums around you. A chaotic symphony of commerce and life along the Euphrates. The air is thick with the smell of clay, sun-baked earth, and the faint, sweet scent of dates. Your latest project, a respectable two-story home, is finally complete. You step back, admiring the neat lines of the mud bricks and the sturdy wooden frame. A sense of pride swells in your chest, but a cold knot of anxiety tightens in your stomach because you're acutely aware of the shadow hanging over your work. The Code of Hammurabi. This isn't just a set of laws, it's a living, breathing part of your world, carved into a great stele in the city center for all to see. Most of the laws are pretty straightforward, but a few, particularly the ones concerning your trade, are just wild. You know the big one. If the house you build for someone collapses and kills the owner, you will be put to death. A simple, brutal concept, an eye for an eye, a life for a life. That's the core of Hammurabi's legal philosophy, and it extends to everything. If the collapse kills the owner's son, your son must be put to death. If it kills a slave, you must replace the slave. It's a cascading nightmare of responsibility, and you can almost feel the weight of it in the dry air. You've double-checked every beam, every mortar joint, your hands are raw from the work, but there's always that lingering doubt. What if a flash flood weakens the foundation? What if a stray tremor from a distant quake proves too much? The stress is a constant companion, a ghost that whispers in the heat of the day. But there are other, stranger rules, too. What if a man breaks into your house? Hammurabi says the thief shall be put to death and buried in front of the hole he made in the wall. You can just imagine the scene, can't you? A grim, public spectacle. It's almost theatrical in its severity. And what about a physician? If a surgeon uses a bronze scalpel to operate on a man and the man dies, the surgeon's hands are to be cut off. It makes you think twice about getting a second opinion. Or really, a first one. Historians still argue whether this was a common punishment or more of a theoretical threat. But either way, it's not exactly a great incentive for the medical profession to take risks. You can't help but wonder if anyone even tried to do difficult surgeries back then. Maybe they just stuck to bandages and prayers. The laws even get into the weeds of daily life. For instance, if a man rents a boat and the boat sinks, he must replace the boat. Seems fair enough. But if a man rents a field and a storm floods it, he still has to pay the rent. The farmer bears the risk. It feels like the world is tilted against you. But at least the laws are written down. That's the mainstream historical fact of Hammurabi's code. It was one of the first and most complete written legal systems. Before this, justice was often based on unwritten customs and the whims of local rulers. This provided a sense of predictability. Even if the punishments were extreme, you know where you stand. You know, for example, that if you're a tavern keeper, you can't water down the beer. If you're caught, you'll be drowned. It seems a bit harsh for a bad pint. But then again, a man needs his beer, especially after a long, stressful day of not killing his clients with his work. You trudge on, the Babylonian sun still heavy on your shoulders. But as the landscape changes, the familiar brick and clay give way to the sprawling fields and irrigation canals of ancient Sumer. You're no longer a builder, but a farmer, and the ground beneath your sandals is fertile and soft. The laws here, while just as strict, feel a bit more grounded, rooted in the very earth you're now tending. This is a world built on agriculture, and the legal code reflects it. The laws are less about grand construction projects and more about the delicate balance of property, water rights, and the endless fight against the creeping forces of nature and the greedy hands of your neighbors. You've heard the stories, of course. The ones whispered over cups of fermented barley. Your neighbor, a grizzled old farmer with more wrinkles than a drying fig, tells you about the time a stray ox ate his crop. Under Sumerian law, the owner of the ox was liable for the damage. It seems fair, right? A simple case of responsibility. But the details get a bit more complex. What if the damage wasn't just a simple munching, but something more deliberate? The theft of a single grain of barley could be met with a swift, brutal punishment. It's the kind of law that makes you want to keep a very close eye on your fields. And maybe invest in a good scarecrow or two. But the real drama, the kind that fuels gossip for months, is the law about what happens if you're a farmer and your irrigation ditch floods your neighbor's field. You are held responsible. You have to pay him back for the grain he lost. And if you can't pay, you're sold into slavery. That's right. A mistake in water management could cost you your freedom. It's a chilling reminder that in this world, a single, careless error could change your life and your family's forever. It's a testament to how crucial water was to their survival. Historians still argue whether this was a common sentence or a deterrent so severe it was rarely used. But the threat is real enough to keep you awake at night. Checking your ditches for leaks by the light of the moon. You feel a gentle sense of panic as you think about your own small plot of land. What if a storm breaks the levee? What if an animal damages the gate? You can almost hear the ticking clock of legal liability. It makes you a very careful, very paranoid farmer. And what about theft? That's where the laws get really strange, even by ancient standards. Remember the Babylonian rule about the thief being buried in his own hole? Well, here in Sumer, if a man steals a boat, he has to pay a fee of 10 shekels of silver. But if he steals a boat used to carry a corpse for burial, the penalty is much more severe. It's not just about the value of the object, but its purpose and the perceived insult to the gods. You can see the logic, but it's a fringe tidbit that makes you shake your head. A boat is a boat, right? Apparently not. The most bizarre legal concept, though, involves something called trial by ordeal. You've heard of it, of course. If you're accused of something and there isn't enough evidence, you might have to submit to a trial by a river. They tie you up and throw you in. If you sink, you're guilty. If you float, you're innocent. It sounds completely insane, doesn't it? As if the river has some kind of divine judgment. You can't help but picture yourself bobbing along, hoping for the best. And let's not forget the other kind of ordeal, a magical test. You could be asked to drink a cup of consecrated water, and if you survived, you were innocent. No wonder everyone was so religious back then. Your life depended on it. The dusty plains of Sumer fade behind you as the landscape shifts, the world becoming greener and more structured, until you find yourself walking the cobbled streets of Rome. The cacophony of the forum swells around you, the shouts of merchants, the clatter of chariot wheels, the passionate speeches of senators. But your attention is drawn not to the grand architecture or the political debates, but to the people themselves. You notice what they're wearing, and you feel a strange sense of unease because you realize your own simple tunic and sandals are being judged. The social code here isn't just a suggestion, it's a matter of law. Particularly when it comes to the bizarre rules around clothing. You see a Roman patrician pass by, his pristine white toga flowing behind him, a symbol of his high status. You know that if he were to wear any other color, especially a dark one, in public, he could be fined. Even the quality of the wool and the way it's draped are legally regulated. And then there are the trousers. You see a few foreigners, Gauls and Germans, wearing their traditional breeches, but you know that for a Roman citizen, wearing trousers was a sign of being an uncivilized barbarian. There were laws, though perhaps not always strictly enforced, that considered them to be a form of treasonous fashion. The Emperor Claudius, a mainstream historical fact, even issued a famous edict banning the wearing of Gallic cloaks and trousers in Rome itself. It was a way to maintain the distinction between Roman and non-Roman. A sartorial line in the sand. You can almost hear the gentle sarcasm in a Roman's voice as they would say, "Oh, you're wearing trousers? Are you planning to herd sheep or conquer a legion?" It seems ridiculous to you. But here, clothes literally make the man, and the law enforced it. This all feels very far from the trials by river of Sumer. A different kind of anxiety entirely. It's not about life or death, but about status and respect, which, in Rome, could be just as important. The legal codes didn't stop there. They dictated everything from the length of your beard to the color of your cloak. A quirky tidbit you recall is the law that regulated the amount of purple dye a person could use in their clothing. Purple was reserved for the emperor and his family, a symbol of ultimate power and divinity. To wear it was a direct challenge to the state. And of course, there were the sumptuary laws that regulated what a person could spend on a feast, how many guests they could have, and even the kind of food they could serve. The Roman legal system, with its immense complexity, was constantly trying to micromanage the lives of its citizens. Historians still argue whether these sumptuary laws were primarily to curb extravagance, to maintain social order, or to prop up a sagging economy. Regardless of the reason, the intent was to ensure that a person's appearance and lifestyle perfectly matched their social rank. A very visible class system enforced by the long arm of the law. You walk along the street, pulling your simple tunic tighter, a sense of relief washing over you. At least you're not a wealthy citizen constantly looking over your shoulder to see if your dinner party is too lavish, or if your toga is of a shade of purple that will get you in trouble. The laws of Rome were everywhere, a quiet but persistent hum beneath the surface of daily life. Leaving the rigid, judgmental streets of Rome behind, you find yourself bathed in the golden light of ancient Egypt. The air, surprisingly, is cleaner here, less of the smoky haze of a great city and more of the sweet, floral scent of lotus blossoms and the earthy smell of the Nile. The civilization of Egypt feels slower, more deliberate, and the laws are different too. They're not so much about social status and public performance, but about permanence and a deep, almost mystical connection to the divine. And you, in this strange new body, are a tattoo artist in the bustling city of Thebes. You're sitting in your small, sun-drenched studio, carefully grinding pigments. You have a reputation for fine work, for creating beautiful, intricate designs that protect the wearer or signal their status. But you're also keenly aware that your work is regulated by laws that feel as old as the pyramids themselves. Tattooing, a mainstream historical fact, was a common practice in ancient Egypt, with mummified remains showing intricate patterns on priests and priestesses, dancers, and even some high-status individuals. The designs were not random, they were often symbols of fertility, protection, and divinity, like the Eye of Horus or the image of the goddess Hathor. But the laws surrounding your craft are strange and specific. A quirky tidbit you know is that it was illegal to tattoo certain images on a person, especially if those images were considered to be demeaning or were a form of punishment. For example, some criminals were tattooed with their crime, a permanent mark of shame. To do this to a person without legal authority would be a serious crime. You had to be careful what you etched into someone's skin. You were not just a craftsman. You were an agent of social and legal order. There was a sort of informal guild that you belonged to, and the elders of your craft would tell you the unwritten rules, the things you just didn't do. Historians still argue whether the laws were formal statutes or simply social taboos. But either way, you knew that inking a royal symbol on a commoner, or a sacred symbol on a foreign slave, could land you in deep trouble. The process itself is different from what you know today. You're not using a modern needle gun, but a set of bronze and bone tools, sharpened to a fine point. You tap the pigment into the skin, a slow, methodical rhythm that is almost meditative. The people who come to you are serious about their ink. A dancer wants a series of dots and lines on her stomach to enhance her femininity and connect her with the goddess Hathor. A priest wants a protective symbol on his arm to guard him from evil spirits. The laws feel less about punishment and more about maintaining the cosmic order. You are a tool of that order. You remember the story of a rival who got a little too creative and tattooed a series of forbidden images on a traveling merchant. The man was eventually caught, and the tattooist was punished. The penalty was not just a fine, but a public humiliation, and the tattooist's hands were bound for a month. A subtle but effective way of saying, you will not use your sacred craft for ill. It was a reminder that in this world, every action had a consequence. And some of those consequences were not just legal, but spiritual. You can almost feel the weight of this responsibility in your hands. The scent of lotus and the feel of the sun-baked mud of Thebes fade, replaced by the pungent aroma of roasted beans and the gentle murmur of conversation in an Ottoman coffeehouse. The world around you is a dizzying mix of brilliant colors and exotic fabrics. A hub of trade and culture. You sit on a cushioned bench, and a servant places a small, steaming cup of coffee in front of you. The rich, dark liquid is a modern comfort, a balm for a weary soul after a long journey through history. But you feel a flicker of anxiety, a familiar unease, because you know that even this simple pleasure, this cup of Java, is a matter of law. The mainstream historical fact here is that coffee, when it was first introduced to the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century, was a source of great suspicion for legal and religious authorities. They saw it as a powerful, mind-altering substance that could lead to public drunkenness, or worse, to seditious talk. The coffeehouses themselves were seen as dens of iniquity, places where men gathered to discuss politics and philosophy, away from the watchful eyes of the state. These were not just social spaces, they were potential breeding grounds for rebellion. The Sultan Murad IV, a notoriously harsh ruler, took this suspicion to a new level. A quirky tidbit is that he made coffee consumption a capital offense. That's right, if you were caught drinking coffee, you could be executed. The law was not always enforced with such severity, but the threat was very real. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine moral crusade or a more pragmatic effort to control dissent. Either way, you can almost feel the tension in the air as you take a sip of your illegal beverage. You half expect a guard to burst through the door, his hand on the hilt of his scimitar. It's a surreal experience, this silent act of rebellion. The legal drama didn't end there. There was a sort of on-again, off-again relationship with the law. Sometimes the coffeehouses were shut down entirely, and other times they were allowed to operate under strict surveillance. You can almost see the humor in it. A state so paranoid about a drink that they would threaten death over it. It seems insane from our perspective, doesn't it? A society so concerned with public discourse that they would try to legislate a stimulant out of existence. You take another sip, a small act of defiance. The coffee is bitter and strong, and it gives you a jolt of energy, a burst of clarity that you can only imagine would be a problem for a paranoid regime. This is the kind of law that makes you appreciate the small freedoms we take for granted. The right to sit in a cafe, to chat with friends, to enjoy a simple drink without the fear of being hauled off to a courtroom. It's a reminder that some of the strangest laws in history are a direct reflection of a society's deepest fears. The fragrant coffee and exotic bustle of the Ottoman Empire dissolve into the stark, dusty landscape of Sparta. The change is jarring. Here, there are no grand buildings or vibrant markets, just hard, simple stone and the relentless discipline of a warrior society. You're a visitor, and the air around you feels thin with a kind of unspoken tension. This is a place where every word, every gesture, is scrutinized, and you're suddenly very aware of the way your mouth is turned up at the corners. Because here, in Sparta, even a smile is a legal risk. The mainstream historical fact about Spartan law is that it was designed to create a society of disciplined, unyielding soldiers. The laws were not written down in the way of Hammurabi's code or Roman edicts. They were part of a larger system called the Great Ritra, a set of unwritten customs and traditions that governed every aspect of life. One of the most famous of these was the law against excessive laughter. Yes, you heard that right. It was a serious offense to laugh too loudly or too long. The Spartans believed that a man who was easily given to mirth was not a serious man, not a good soldier. You were expected to be stoic, serious, and to control your emotions at all times. A quirky tidbit you learn is that there were even laws against physical comfort. Soft beds were illegal. The Spartans slept on reed mats, and the law stated that you had to make your bed with your bare hands, not with a tool. To make it harder, the idea was to toughen you up, to make you more resilient to pain and discomfort. It's a kind of legal system that makes you want to squirm. A constant pressure to be on, to be disciplined. You feel the corners of your mouth twitch, and you quickly turn your face away, pretending to be interested in a nearby training exercise. Historians still argue whether these laws were strictly enforced with formal penalties or if they were more of a social code enforced by public shame and ridicule. But either way, you can feel the weight of it. You can almost see a Spartan elder giving you a stern look. A silent warning. The legal system here is not about fines or imprisonment, it's about social conformity. To be an outsider was to be a lawbreaker, and the penalties were social exclusion, a fate that in this tightly knit society was probably worse than a physical punishment. It was a system of control that got under your skin, a quiet, constant pressure to conform. The austere, silent discipline of Sparta fades into the vibrant, chaotic intellectual energy of ancient Athens. You stand in the agora, the central marketplace, a place not just of commerce but of fierce debate and political discourse. Unlike the Spartans, the Athenians celebrate speech. They live for it, but you quickly learn that this freedom of expression comes with its own set of rules. And to break them is a legal offense. The laws here are not about laughter or what you wear, but about what you say, and how you say it. The mainstream historical fact is that in Athens, the art of rhetoric was a central part of life. A man's ability to speak well in the assembly or in court was a matter of life and death. The legal system was based on citizen juries, and there were no professional lawyers, so you had to argue your own case. This led to a thriving industry of speechwriters and teachers of rhetoric. But it also led to some very strange laws. A quirky tidbit you learn is that there was a law against sycophancy, which in this context meant making a living by bringing frivolous or malicious lawsuits. In modern terms, it would be the equivalent of a professional troll. The Athenians hated this practice, and you could be punished for it. The laws were designed to protect the integrity of the legal system and the political process. You remember an old case, a famous one, where a man was accused of making a false claim in court. He lost his case and was sentenced to pay a fine, but because he was a repeat offender, he also lost his civil rights. That meant he could no longer speak in public, he could no longer vote, and he could no longer sue anyone. It was a very Athenian punishment, to be stripped of your ability to participate in the one thing they valued most, public life. Historians still argue whether this was an effective deterrent or simply a way to get rid of political opponents. But it was a very real threat, and it made you think twice before you opened your mouth. The legal system was also concerned with the morality of speech. It was a crime to slander someone in public, but what constituted slander was a matter of open debate. You can almost feel the tension in the air as a speaker on a raised platform delivers a passionate, biting attack on a political rival. Is it slander, or is it just a clever piece of rhetoric? The line is a fine one, and the jury, a body of 500 citizens, would have to decide. The legal system was a kind of high-stakes game of intellectual combat. And the rules, though seemingly simple, were full of trapdoors and pitfalls. You can almost see the gears turning in your head, trying to figure out the right thing to say, the right way to say it, to avoid a legal nightmare. The freedom of speech here was not absolute. It was a privilege that came with great responsibility and a very real risk. The intellectual ferment of Athens dissolves into the misty, green landscape of ancient Ireland. The air here is damp and cool, smelling of peat and wet stone. The society feels different, less focused on grand cities and more on a collection of tribes and clans. The laws are not carved in stone stels, but passed down orally by a class of legal experts called the Phili. You find yourself in a funeral procession, and you notice a group of women at the front. Their faces a mask of professional grief, wailing in a loud, sorrowful cadence. These are the band sidhi, the banshee wailers, and their grief, you soon learn, is a matter of law. The mainstream historical fact is that in ancient Ireland, professional mourners were a real thing, an important part of the legal and social structure. A proper funeral, with the correct amount of wailing, was a sign of respect for the deceased and their family, and it was a public display of status. The laws, the Brian laws, were incredibly complex and detailed, and they even regulated the art of grieving. A quirky tidbit is that there were specific rules about the length and intensity of the wailing, and there were penalties for an improper performance. If you were a professional mourner and you failed to deliver the right kind of lament, you could be fined. The laws even dictated who was allowed to mourn and for how long. The wailing was not just an emotional outburst, it was a regulated legal performance, a kind of auditory contract. Historians still argue whether these laws were about maintaining social order or if they were a kind of economic regulation, ensuring that a person's status was properly represented at their funeral. Either way, you can almost hear the legalistic nature of the wailing. It's a practiced art, a professional skill, and a legal duty. And what if a professional mourner was too good, too powerful in their wailing? You've heard the story of a woman who was so good at her job that she was considered a danger. Her wails were said to be able to cause sickness and misfortune. There was a law, a strange, Fringe tidbit. That prohibited her from wailing in certain public places. Her power was so great. It had to be controlled by law. The experience of the funeral procession is surreal. The wailing is a mix of genuine grief and professional performance. And you can't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. It's a reminder that in this world, even the most personal and emotional parts of life are regulated by a strict legal code. It's a far cry from the abstract legal theories of Athens or the harsh practicalities of Sparta. Here, the law is intertwined with the spiritual and the emotional, a gentle, but firm, hand guiding you through every step of life. In death, the weeping of ancient Ireland fades into the cold, salt-sprayed air of a Viking settlement. The world here is rough and unyielding, a place of sagas and battles, but also of surprisingly complex legal systems. The laws here are not about wailing or speeches, but about honor. And the greatest insult is a form of legal action. You find yourself at a thing, a public assembly where disputes are settled, and you quickly learn that the most dangerous weapon is not a sword, but a well-crafted poem. The mainstream historical fact about Viking law is that it was not codified in written form for a long time. It was a system of oral law, passed down from generation to generation by law speakers. The legal process was very public, and it relied heavily on witnesses and the consensus of the community. But a quirky tidbit you learn is that the law had a special place for a form of verbal duel called nith. This was a public insult, often in the form of a poem, that was so severe it was considered a crime. To call a man a coward or to question his masculinity was a legal offense. And it could be met with a fine or, in extreme cases, a duel. It's the kind of law that makes you want to watch your tongue. Even when you're just trading stories over a fire. The laws were not just about property or theft, they were about preserving a man's honor, which in this society was a matter of life and death. You remember the story of a man who was publicly called a coward at a thing. He was given the chance to prove his accuser wrong, and he did so in a bloody duel. But what if he hadn't? What if he had been proven a coward? Under the law, he would have been declared an outlaw, a person with no rights, and anyone could kill him without consequence. Historians still argue whether this was a common occurrence or a rare, extreme measure, but the threat was very real. It's a legal system that's based on reputation and public perception, a kind of social contract where a man's word is his bond. And a poet's insult is a legal strike. You can almost see the gears turning in their heads, not just thinking about how to win a legal case, but how to win a verbal battle. How to craft an insult so perfect it would cut a man down without a sword. The cold, rough justice of the Vikings is replaced by the thin, high-altitude air of the Andes Mountains. You are a court official in the vast Inca Empire, a world of terraced fields, stone cities, and a legal system that is as complex and elegant as the knots on a piece of string. The laws here are not spoken, but recorded in a system of knotted cords called a quipu. And you, in your role, are responsible for interpreting them. The mainstream historical fact about the Inca is that they had no written language in the way we understand it. Their records, including legal statutes and census data, were all kept on quipu, a fascinating system of colored threads and knots. The color of the string, the type of knot, and its position on the cord all had meaning. A quirky tidbit you learn is that there was a special class of officials, the quipu kamayuk, who were trained to read and create these records. You are one of them, and your job is to interpret the legal knots. A knot of a certain size and color might represent a specific crime, and another knot on the same string might represent the punishment. The legal system was based on a philosophy of, do not steal, do not lie, do not be lazy, and the laws were designed to enforce this simple, yet powerful, code of conduct. You are holding a quipu in your hands, and you are trying to interpret a case of theft. You see a red thread, which you know signifies a case of blood-related law, and a series of knots that indicate a person has stolen from a family member. The next set of knots, on a different thread, indicates the punishment. In this case, it is a fine of a certain number of llamas. It's a system that feels both alien and strangely logical. The laws are not just about punishment, they are about maintaining the social and moral order. Historians still argue whether the quipu was a form of proto-writing or simply a mnemonic device for trained officials. But either way, it was the backbone of the legal system. It's a reminder that a legal system does not need a written language to be complex and effective. The intricate knots of the Inca quipu unravel and scatter like fallen leaves. And the cold mountain air gives way to the vast, wind-swept steppes of Central Asia. The world is now a sea of grass and sky. And you are a courier, riding on a fast horse, part of the legendary postal system of the Mongol Empire. The laws here are not about knotted strings or public insults, but about the speed of your horse and the sanctity of your message. The mainstream historical fact is that the Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan and his successors, created a massive and highly efficient communication and transport system called the YAM. This system, a network of relay stations across the empire, allowed messages and goods to travel at an astonishing speed. It was the information superhighway of its time. The laws that governed this system were strict and uncompromising. You, as a courier, are given a pesa, a special tablet that serves as your passport and your authority. This tablet, a quirky tidbit gave you the legal right to demand a fresh horse and provisions at any relay station. To deny a courier with a pesa was a crime punishable by death. The law was absolute because the system was the lifeblood of the empire. Without it, the vast territory could not be governed. Historians still argue whether the YAM was more about military control or administrative efficiency. Regardless, the laws that governed it were fascinatingly specific. For example, a courier was not allowed to carry anything but his message and his personal gear. To carry contraband or to use the system for personal gain was a serious offense. You can almost feel the weight of this responsibility on your shoulders. The law here is not about personal morality, but about the smooth functioning of the state. It's a pragmatic, brutal legal code, a reflection of a society that values speed and efficiency above all else. You race across the steppe, the wind whipping past your face, the rhythm of the horse's hooves a steady, calming beat. You see a relay station in the distance, a small cluster of tents, and you feel a sense of relief. You know that as long as you have your pesa, the law is on your side, and for a brief moment, you can appreciate the genius of this system, a system that linked disparate cultures and territories, and a legal code that was the very engine of that connection. The open steppe gives way to the bustling, intricate city of Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire. The air is now thick with the scent of copal incense, roasting corn, and the faint, sweet smell of 1,000 flowers. You are a commoner, a Makawali, and you are walking through the market, a vibrant, noisy tapestry of life, but you are also keenly aware of the strict laws that govern this society, particularly the ones surrounding public behavior. And none are more fearsome than the laws on public drunkenness. The mainstream historical fact is that the Aztecs had a very complex and stratified society, and the laws were different depending on your social class. For the common person, drinking was generally frowned upon and was only permitted for ritual purposes or in very limited circumstances, such as for the elderly. To be caught publicly drunk was a serious offense. A quirky tidbit is that the first time a commoner was caught drunk, their head would be shaved as a mark of shame. The second time, they would be beaten and have their house confiscated. But the third time, they would be executed. You can almost feel the weight of this law on your shoulders. It's a system designed to maintain social order and discipline, a kind of paternalistic legal code that says, we will protect you from your own worst instincts, even if it kills you. Historians still argue whether these laws were an effective way to control a population or simply a brutal tool of oppression. Regardless, you can see the results of it in the general sobriety of the market. People are focused, diligent, and sober. You see a man who has clearly had a drink, and his friends are trying to get him home quickly. A quiet sense of panic in their movements. The law here is not a distant, abstract concept. It is a very real and present danger. For the nobles, the law was different. They were often given more leeway. But if a nobleman was caught drunk, he would also be publicly shamed. A reminder that even the elite were not above the law. The legal system was a kind of social contract, and the consequences for breaking it were swift and often fatal. The vibrant market of Tenochtitlan fades, replaced by the hot, dusty expanse of the ancient Anatolian plains. The air here smells of dry grass and horseflesh, and the roar of a crowd echoes in the distance. You are a charioteer, and your hands are raw from holding the reins, your heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. You are at a massive hippodrome, About to participate in a chariot race governed by the complex and brutal laws of the Hittite Empire. The mainstream historical fact about the Hittites is that they were a powerful and militaristic civilization. And their laws were surprisingly modern in some respects. They were less based on the eye for an eye philosophy of Hammurabi's code and more on fines and restitution. But the laws surrounding the chariot races were a world unto themselves. A quirky tidbit you learn is that the rules of the race were not just about winning, they were about maintaining the integrity of the sport. For example, it was a serious offense to cut off another charioteer or to cause a crash that resulted in injury. The penalty for such an offense could be a fine, a beating, or even a ban from racing for a period of time. It was a kind of sports law, a legal system that was designed to protect the athletes and the sanctity of the competition. You remember the story of a famous charioteer who was caught using a trick to slow down his opponent's chariot. He was not only fined, but his chariot was also confiscated, and he was publicly humiliated. It was a punishment that went beyond the law. It was a punishment that was designed to destroy his reputation. Historians still argue whether these laws were an effective deterrent or simply a way for the wealthy elite to control the sport. Regardless, you can feel the pressure to not only win, but to win according to the rules. A single, careless mistake could cost you not only the race, but your career and your reputation. The dust and roar of the Hittite chariot race dissolve into the crisp, clean air of a Roman province. You are a Roman citizen, but the world around you is no longer defined by the laws of toga and class. Instead, you feel a new, powerful force at work, the burgeoning religion of Christianity. The legal landscape is shifting dramatically, and you find yourself at a pivotal moment in history. A time when one of the most important legal documents of the ancient world is about to be issued, the Edict of Milan. The mainstream historical fact is that before the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, Christians in the Roman Empire were often persecuted. Their refusal to worship the Roman gods and emperors was seen as a form of treason, and they were subject to various forms of legal punishment, from fines to torture to execution. The emperors Diocletian and Galerius had overseen some of the most brutal persecutions in the empire's history. But the Edict of Milan, issued by the emperors Constantine the Great and Licinius, changed everything. It was a legal decree that proclaimed religious toleration throughout the empire, effectively ending the persecution of Christians. It was a game changer, a legal document that recognized the right of individuals to worship as they pleased. A quirky tidbit you learn is that the edict wasn't just about Christianity, it was about all religions. The text explicitly states that everyone, Christian or not, should be free to follow their own beliefs. This was a radical idea for a civilization that had always tied religious practice to state authority. It was a legal acknowledgement of the concept of religious freedom, a concept that would not be fully realized for centuries. Historians still argue whether Constantine's motives were primarily political or religious. Did he genuinely believe in the power of the Christian God, or was he simply making a pragmatic decision to pacify a growing and increasingly influential minority? The answer is probably a bit of both, but the legal effect was undeniable. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief from the Christian community. A new sense of security and belonging in a world that had, for so long, seen them as outcasts. The law had changed, and with it, the very fabric of Roman society. The Edict of Milan, a landmark of religious freedom, is a fleeting memory. The world around you shifts once more, and you are no longer a Roman citizen but a subject of the Qin dynasty in ancient China. The air is cold and a sense of pervasive order hangs over everything. The laws here are not about freedom, but about absolute control, and you find yourself living under a brutal legal philosophy known as legalism. The mainstream historical fact about legalism is that it was a school of thought that believed in a strong central government and strict adherence to the law to maintain order. The first emperor of the Qin dynasty, Qin Shi Huang, adopted this philosophy and used it to unify and rule a vast, newly conquered empire. The laws were not suggestions, they were absolute commands, and the punishments for breaking them were severe. But the strangest and most unsettling part of this legal system was the concept of collective punishment. A quirky tidbit you learn is that if one person in a family or a village committed a crime, the entire family or village could be held legally responsible. You are constantly watching your neighbors, not just out of curiosity, but out of a fear that their actions could lead to your punishment. You are a part of a 10-family unit, a kind of legal group, and if one person in your group commits a crime and you don't report them, you can all be punished. The law is designed to create a system of mutual surveillance, a world where no one can be trusted and everyone is a potential informer. Historians still argue whether this system of collective punishment was effective in maintaining order or if it simply led to a society of paranoia and distrust. Regardless, you can feel the weight of it every single day. A farmer's son steals a chicken from a neighbor, and suddenly, your family's harvest is confiscated as a fine. A traveler passing through your village breaks a law, and you are all held responsible. The laws here are not just about a person's individual actions, they are about their place in a group. A system that strips away individual responsibility in favor of a collective accountability. It is a harsh and unrelenting legal code, a reflection of a society that valued control above all else. You can almost feel the cold dread of a whispered rumor, a nervous glance, a constant sense of being watched. The laws were also about micromanaging every aspect of life. You couldn't even leave your village without official permission. Your work was regulated by the state, and your social mobility was non-existent. The law was an all-encompassing force, a kind of benevolent dictator that promised order in exchange for absolute submission. And as you feel the cold wind on your face and look up at the stern, unblinking eyes of a passing official, you are suddenly very aware of the price you are paying for that order. Now, as the long, dark shadow of history begins to recede, let yourself feel the weight of these strange and ancient laws lifting from your shoulders. The anxieties of the past, the threat of a collapsing wall, the fear of a stolen grain, the terror of a verbal insult, they are all gone. The ghosts of these legal systems, with their bizarre rules and their harsh punishments, are fading into the night. Your mind, once filled with the clatter of Roman chariots and the whispers of Inca knots, is becoming quiet. The world is soft now, and the air is still. Your journey through history is complete. All that's left to do is drift away into a deep and peaceful sleep. Let the sounds of the night be your guide. The gentle hum of the fan, the distant, muffled sound of the world outside. The legal codes of the ancients are no longer your concern. Your only law now is the law of rest, the law of sweet and silent dreams.